If the Alpha King smells your heat, you won't belong to yourself anymore. The warning echoed through Vivian Hale's mind as she pressed a trembling hand against the cold marble sink inside the servants' washroom beneath Blackthorn Palace. Another wave of nausea rolled through her stomach so suddenly she nearly collapsed. Bitter medicine burned the back of her throat. A thin line of blood stained the corner of her lips before she wiped it away with shaking fingers. The suppressant pills weren't working anymore. They hadn't truly worked in weeks. But tonight was worse. Tonight felt like her body was beginning to betray her completely. Above her, somewhere beyond layers of stone corridors and towering vaulted ceilings, the palace bells rang 3 slow chimes. The Alpha King had returned. Every servant in Blackthorn Palace had been whispering about it since dawn. Rowan Draven, King of the Northern Territories. The wolf who conquered rival packs before he turned 30. The man powerful enough to silence a room simply by walking into it. Vivian squeezed her eyes shut as another pulse of heat crawled through her veins like wildfire under ice. Not now, she whispered desperately. Please, not now. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the final suppressant capsule wrapped carefully in cloth. Her last one. Illegal. Expensive. Dangerous. She swallowed it dry anyway. The medicine scraped painfully down her throat. For a moment, nothing happened. Then coldness spread through her chest, numbing the fire beneath her skin just enough for her to breathe again. Vivian exhaled shakily and stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror above the sink. Pale skin, soft brown hair pinned tightly beneath a servant's cap, gray eyes shadowed with exhaustion. No one looking at her would ever guess she was a full Omega. That was the point. In Blackthorn Palace, hidden Omegas rarely stayed hidden for long, especially near the king, especially during heat season. She adjusted the collar of her dark uniform and forced herself upright. The archive tower wouldn't organize itself, and if she missed another shift, Supervisor Kent would start asking questions she couldn't afford to answer. Vivian stepped carefully into the narrow corridor outside the washroom. The palace was alive tonight. Footsteps echoed through the halls. Guards moved quickly between staircases carrying reports from the southern border. Noble families arrived in sleek black carriages beyond the front gates for the upcoming Winter Council gathering. The scent of pine smoke and cold snow drifted through the ancient stone hallways every time the outer doors opened. But beneath all of it, beneath the palace perfumes and polished cedarwood, another scent lingered in the air now. Wild, clean, dangerous. Alpha. Vivian's pulse stumbled. Rowan Draven was somewhere nearby. Instinctively, her body reacted before her mind could stop it. Heat rose beneath her skin again, softer this time, but unmistakable. She lowered her head and quickened her pace toward the eastern staircase. Don't react. Don't look up. Don't let him notice you. Most servants feared the Alpha King because of his power. Vivian feared him because of what her own body might do near him. She had spent 6 years hiding what she was. 6 years suppressing every instinct. 6 years surviving. She would not lose control now. Voices suddenly echoed ahead. Male voices. Guards. Vivian froze near the corner as 2 royal sentries straightened instantly, fists striking their chests in salute. The air itself seemed to change. Heavy. Charged. Her stomach tightened violently. Footsteps approached from the opposite corridor. Slow. Measured. Impossible to ignore. Rowan Draven appeared a second later. Vivian had seen the king only once before from a distance during a royal procession. That had been years ago. It hadn't prepared her for this. He was taller than everyone around him by nearly a head, broad-shouldered beneath a dark wool coat dusted lightly with snow. Black leather gloves covered his hands. His dark hair fell loosely around a face carved sharp enough to look almost unreal beneath the dim palace lights. But it was his eyes that stole the breath from her lungs. Silver. Cold silver, like moonlight reflecting across frozen water. His expression remained unreadable as advisors walked beside him speaking rapidly about territory disputes and supply shortages. Rowan barely acknowledged them. Power radiated from him effortlessly, quietly, like something restrained behind steel doors. Vivian immediately lowered her gaze and stepped backward into the shadows beside the wall. Just pass by? Please just pass by. Her fingers tightened around the fabric of her sleeves as the suppressant medicine struggled against the heat inside her bloodstream. 1 heartbeat. 2. 3. Then Rowan stopped walking. Silence spread instantly through the corridor. Vivian's pulse thundered painfully. Slowly, she looked up. The Alpha King had turned his head slightly toward her. Not fully, just enough for those silver eyes to narrow almost imperceptibly. His advisor stopped speaking. One of the guards glanced nervously between them. Vivian's entire body went cold. He smelled something. Rowan took one slow step closer. Not threatening. Not aggressive. Somehow that made it worse. His gaze settled on her face with unnerving focus. Vivian lowered her eyes again immediately, but not before she saw the faint shift in his expression. Confusion. Curiosity. Something restless beneath the surface. The air around them tightened unbearably. Then Rowan spoke for the first time, his voice deep and calm enough to send chills down her spine. Who was in this corridor before I arrived? The corridor remained perfectly still after the Alpha King spoke. Vivian could hear the distant crackling of fireplace logs somewhere deeper in the palace halls, but nearby, nobody breathed loudly enough to break the silence. One of the royal guards straightened nervously. No one, Your Majesty, he answered carefully. The eastern corridor has been empty for several minutes. Rowan's silver eyes shifted back toward Vivian. She felt the weight of his attention like cold pressure against her skin. Not anger. Worse. Focus. Her pulse fluttered painfully beneath her ribs as the suppressant medicine struggled to contain the warmth spreading through her body again. She lowered her gaze further, praying her scent remained buried beneath the layers of bitter herbs and chemical suppressants. For one terrifying second, she thought he might step closer. Instead, Rowan's expression hardened slightly, as though irritated by something invisible. Strange, he murmured quietly. One of the advisors beside him forced a laugh. Perhaps one of the noble daughters passed through earlier, Your Majesty. The Winter Council has brought half the unmated women in the territory to Blackthorn already. Rowan did not smile. His gaze lingered on Vivian another moment before finally shifting away. Perhaps, he said calmly. The pressure in the corridor eased the instant he turned. Vivian nearly lost strength in her knees from relief alone. Rowan resumed walking, his dark coat brushing softly behind him as the guards and advisors quickly followed. Yet even as he disappeared farther down the corridor, something inside Vivian remained painfully alert. Like her body still recognized him nearby. She waited until the sound of footsteps faded completely before forcing herself to breathe again. Girl. The sharp whisper startled her. Vivian turned to find Martha, one of the older kitchen servants, hurrying toward her carrying folded linens. Martha's pale face looked tense. What happened? She whispered urgently. The king stopped walking. Vivian shook her head too quickly. Nothing happened. Martha studied her carefully, eyes narrowing with concern. You are sweating. Vivian immediately wiped at her temple. Her fingers came away trembling. The older woman lowered her voice further. Your medicine is failing, is it not? Fear flashed through Vivian so sharply she almost stepped backward. Do not say that here. Martha glanced down the empty corridor before pulling Vivian closer beside the stone wall. Listen to me carefully, she whispered. The palace healers said the Alpha King has been restless since returning from the southern territories. His wolf is agitated. The guards are already searching for the cause. Vivian's stomach tightened. Searching? Martha nodded grimly. They think an Omega entered the palace during heat season without registration. Cold panic spread through Vivian's chest. Registered Omegas received protected chambers during heat cycles under royal supervision. Unregistered ones were considered unstable risks. Dangerous. If anyone discovered what she truly was, Blackthorn Palace would never allow her to disappear quietly. Martha's expression softened slightly. You need stronger suppressants. I cannot afford them anymore. Then leave before the Winter Council begins. Vivian swallowed hard. Leave. The words sounded simple until reality settled in. She had nowhere safe left to go. No pack willing to shelter a hidden Omega without demanding something in return. No family. No protection. The palace archives were the only reason she had survived this long, unnoticed. I just need a few more days, she whispered weakly. Martha looked unconvinced, but before she could answer, another wave of warmth rolled suddenly through Vivian's body so intensely her breath caught. The scent of pine and winter frost flooded her senses again. Alpha. Close. Much too close. Both women turned instinctively. At the far end of the corridor, Rowan Draven had stopped walking a second time. Slowly, the Alpha King looked back over his shoulder directly toward Vivian. And this time, there was no confusion in his silver eyes at all. There was recognition. Vivian stopped breathing the moment Rowan Draven looked at her again. The corridor suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. Even 30 feet away, she could feel the shift in him now. Not just attention. Awareness. The Alpha King stood perfectly still at the far end of the hall, while servants and advisors froze around him uncertainly. Snow melted slowly from the shoulders of his black coat, dripping onto the marble floor beneath his boots. His silver eyes never left her. Martha grabbed Vivian's wrist hard enough to startle her. "Go," the older woman whispered urgently. "Now." Vivian did not hesitate a second longer. She lowered her head immediately and turned away, forcing herself into a controlled pace instead of running. Running would attract attention. Running would confirm fear. But every instinct inside her screamed to flee. She could still feel Rowan's gaze against her back as she disappeared through the eastern staircase and hurried deeper into the lower palace corridors. Her heart pounded violently with every step. By the time she reached the archive tower, her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the brass key ring clipped to her belt. The old tower stood isolated from the grand halls of Blackthorn Palace, hidden behind narrow stone passages most nobles never bothered using. Dusty records filled floor after floor of ancient shelves, and the cold here always settled deep into the bones. Normally, Vivian loved the silence of the archives. Tonight the shadows only made her feel trapped. She locked the tower door behind her and pressed both palms against it, struggling to steady her breathing. He knows. The terrifying thought repeated itself over and over in her mind. Maybe not fully. Maybe not yet. But alpha wolves did not look at people the way Rowan had looked at her unless instinct was involved. Vivian forced herself away from the door and moved toward the nearest desk stacked with council records waiting to be sorted before morning. Work. Focus on work. That was how she survived. She lit another oil lamp and tried ignoring the lingering warmth crawling beneath her skin. Outside the narrow tower windows, snow drifted steadily across the dark mountains surrounding Blackthorn. The storm was getting worse. Wind rattled faintly against the glass. Minutes passed, then an hour. Slowly, her pulse began calming. By midnight, the suppressants finally seemed to regain enough control for her thoughts to clear again. Vivian finished organizing the final stack of council ledgers and carried them carefully toward the restricted shelves at the rear of the archive hall. The deeper chambers were colder than the upper floors, carved directly into the mountain stone beneath the palace. Few people ever came down here except historians and royal archivists, which was why the scent hit her instantly the moment she opened the iron gate. Pine, frost, wolf. Vivian froze so abruptly the ledgers nearly slipped from her arms. Someone was already inside the restricted chamber. Heavy footsteps echoed softly somewhere between the towering shelves ahead. Her pulse spiked. No, 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 no. Slowly, she stepped backward toward the gate. Then a voice emerged calmly from the darkness. "You keep trying to run from me." Every ounce of warmth vanished from Vivian's body at once. Rowan Draven stepped into the dim lantern light between the shelves, impossibly silent for a man his size. Without the crowd of guards and advisors around him, his presence felt even more dangerous somehow. More focused, more personal. His silver eyes studied her carefully while snowmelt still glimmered faintly in his dark hair. Vivian lowered her gaze immediately. "Your Majesty." Rowan moved one step closer. Not enough to corner her. Enough to make her pulse stumble again. "What is your name?" he asked quietly. "Vivian." Her voice came out softer than she intended. "Vivian Hale." The Alpha King repeated her name slowly, like he was testing the sound of it. Something in his expression shifted again, subtle but unmistakable. His wolf recognized her. Vivian felt it before he spoke another word. "Why?" Rowan asked calmly. "Does your scent disappear every time I get close to you?" The question settled between them like a blade balanced on glass. Vivian's fingers tightened around the stack of ledgers against her chest as panic spread through her bloodstream faster than heat itself. Rowan Draven was too close now. Close enough that she could feel the unnatural steadiness of his breathing. Close enough that the scent of frost and cedar surrounded her completely. Most terrifying of all, close enough that her own body wanted to respond. She forced herself to keep her eyes lowered. "I do not understand what you mean, Your Majesty." Silence followed. Not disbelief. Observation. Rowan studied her with the same sharp focus predators used before deciding whether something would run. Vivian felt it in every nerve beneath her skin. Then slowly, he moved closer again. One step. The lantern light shifted across the hard lines of his face, casting silver into his eyes. "You are frightened," he said quietly. No, the lie came too fast. Rowan's gaze dropped briefly to the ledgers trembling in her arms. "Your hands disagree with you." Heat rushed painfully into Vivian's cheeks. She hated that he noticed everything. Outside, wind slammed. Suddenly against the narrow archive windows hard enough to rattle the glass. The storm had worsened into a full blizzard now. Snow hissed violently against the mountain walls surrounding Blackthorn Palace. Rowan glanced briefly toward the distant windows before returning his attention to her. The eastern roads are already closing, he murmured. No one will be leaving the palace tonight. Something inside Vivian's stomach dropped at those words. Trapped. The thought alone nearly made her dizzy. She needed distance from him. Time. Another suppressant dose. Instead, the Alpha King stood only a few feet away looking at her like a puzzle he intended to solve personally. Vivian stepped backward carefully toward the nearest shelf. If there is nothing else you require, Your Majesty, I should return to work. Rowan did not move aside. You work alone down here? Usually. That seems unsafe. Vivian almost laughed at the irony. Nothing in Blackthorn Palace felt remotely safe anymore. Another wave of warmth rolled suddenly through her body without warning, stronger than before. Her breath caught softly. The suppressants were failing again. Rowan noticed instantly. His expression sharpened. Vivian lowered her head quickly, but it was already too late. The air changed around him. Not visibly. Instinctively. The Alpha King's shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly as his wolf reacted beneath the surface. For the first time since entering the archive chamber, Rowan looked unsettled. His next inhale came slower. Deeper. Vivian's pulse thundered. No. Please no. She stepped backward again, but the edge of the stone shelf stopped her retreat. Rowan's silver eyes darkened slightly, as though fighting concentration. Vivian, he said quietly. Hearing her name in his voice made heat crawl painfully up her spine. What are you hiding from me? The question was not cruel. That somehow made it worse. Vivian gripped the ledgers tighter. Nothing. Rowan took another step. Too close now. The scent of winter pine wrapped around her completely. Her wolf instincts twisted violently beneath the suppressants. Aching toward warmth, she had spent years denying herself. She hated her own body for reacting this way. Rowan suddenly stopped moving. His jaw tightened hard enough for her to notice even in the dim lantern light. One black-gloved hand flexed once at his side like restraint cost him effort now. His voice lowered further. Your heartbeat changes every time I approach you. Vivian's breathing turned shallow. The archive chamber suddenly felt unbearably warm despite the cold stone walls. Your Majesty, she whispered weakly. Then the lanterns flickered. A violent gust shook the tower again, and somewhere above them, the heavy iron mechanisms of the archive gate slammed shut automatically with a deep metallic echo. Both of them looked upward instantly. The stormlock system. During severe weather, sections of Blackthorn Palace sealed automatically until morning. Vivian's blood turned ice cold. They were locked inside together. The sound of the iron gates locking echoed through the archive tower like a final warning. Vivian stared upward toward the dark ceiling above the shelves, her pulse pounding so hard it hurt. The stormlock system would not release until sunrise. 8 hours. Maybe more if the blizzard worsened. 8 hours trapped inside the archive chamber with the most dangerous alpha in the Northern Territories while her suppressants failed inside her bloodstream. Panic climbed sharply into her chest. Rowan remained completely still a few feet away, but the tension around him had changed. Vivian could feel it now with terrifying clarity. His wolf was reacting to her. Not violently. Not aggressively. Worse. Intently. The Alpha King lowered his gaze back to her slowly. You are shaking. Vivian immediately tightened her grip on the ledgers. It is cold. Rowan's eyes flicked briefly toward the nearby lantern flames. No, he said quietly. It is not. Heat pulsed through her again, so suddenly she nearly lost her balance. She inhaled sharply and turned away before he could see the fear on her face. Think. The emergency storage room. There were old sleeping chambers deeper inside the archive level where scholars stayed during winter storms. If she could lock herself inside one until morning, maybe she could survive this night unnoticed. Vivian moved quickly toward the back corridor. Where are you going? Rowan asked behind her. There are emergency rooms below the archive hall. She forced steadiness into her voice. You should remain here, Your Majesty. I will return with more lantern oil. It was a terrible lie. Rowan clearly knew it too. But surprisingly, he did not stop her. Vivian hurried through the narrow stone passage beyond the shelves, trying to ignore the warmth spreading steadily through her limbs. The suppressants were collapsing faster now under stress. She could feel it in the aching pressure beneath her skin. Her breathing had already become too shallow. Behind her, Rowan followed silently. The knowledge of him walking several feet back sent nervous heat racing through her chest all over again. They reached the lower chamber minutes later. The room was small but warm, with a narrow fireplace built into the stone wall and several old cots lined neatly beside stacks of unused blankets. Vivian rushed immediately toward the cabinet near the hearth. Empty. No medicine. No calming herbs. Nothing useful. Her stomach dropped. Vivian. Rowan's voice came from behind her again, softer this time. She turned too quickly. Big mistake. The sudden movement made dizziness crash over her instantly. The room tilted. Her knees weakened beneath her. Before she could catch herself, the ledgers slipped from her arms and scattered across the floor. Rowan reached her in less than a second. One gloved hand closed carefully around her forearm to steady her before she fell completely. The moment he touched her, everything inside Vivian's body reacted at once. Warmth exploded through her veins so violently she gasped. Rowan froze too. His fingers tightened reflexively around her arm before immediately loosening again. The Alpha King inhaled sharply like the contact itself shocked him. Vivian could hear the subtle shift in his breathing now. Less controlled, more instinctive. She pulled away from him instantly, backing toward the fireplace. "Do not touch me." The words escaped her before she could stop them. Rowan went still. A flicker of something crossed his face then. Not anger. Hurt. Confusion. He stared at her for one long second before stepping backward deliberately, giving her distance. "I was trying to keep you from falling." Vivian wrapped her arms tightly around herself, trembling harder now. Her skin burned beneath her clothes. Every instinct begged her to move closer to the warmth radiating from him, and she hated herself for it. Rowan seemed to notice the internal fight happening behind her eyes. Slowly, his jaw tightened. He turned away from her abruptly and braced one hand against the stone wall beside the fireplace. His shoulders rose once with a controlled breath. Then again, Vivian stared in shock as faint gold flickered briefly through his silver eyes before disappearing. The Alpha King was losing control too. The room fell into a heavy silence broken only by the storm outside and the sharp crackle of firewood inside the hearth. Vivian could not stop staring at Rowan Draven. The faint flash of gold in his eyes had disappeared already, but the memory of it tightened fear around her chest all over again. Alpha wolves lost control for many reasons. Rage, territorial instinct, threats against their pack. But this felt different. Personal. Rowan kept one hand braced against the stone wall beside the fireplace, shoulders tense beneath his dark coat, as though every breath required effort now. He was deliberately keeping distance from her. That realization unsettled Vivian more than if he had stepped closer. Most alpha males did not retreat from weakness, especially not from omegas. Yet Rowan looked almost angry at himself for reacting to her at all. The firelight flickered across the sharp line of his jaw as he stared into the flames without looking at her. "How long?" he asked quietly. Vivian swallowed hard. "How long what? How long have you been suppressing your scent?" Fear tightened instantly inside her stomach. She should not answer him. Every instinct screamed that the more the Alpha King knew, the more dangerous this became. But exhaustion wore down her defenses faster than fear tonight. 6 years. Rowan finally turned toward her then. Real surprise crossed his expression for the first time since entering the archive chamber. "That is not possible. It is if you are desperate enough." Her voice came out sharper than intended. Rowan studied her silently. Vivian regretted speaking immediately. She wrapped her arms tighter around herself and stared toward the fire instead of him. Warmth pulsed painfully beneath her skin again. The suppressants were barely holding together now. "Why hide?" Rowan asked after a long pause. "Unregistered omegas are protected under Northern law." Vivian almost laughed. The sound that escaped her throat held no humor at all. "Protected?" She shook her head slowly. "Maybe for noble families. Maybe for omegas born into powerful packs." Rowan's eyes narrowed slightly. Vivian regretted speaking again, but once the memories rose to the surface, they refused to stay buried. "My pack registered omegas differently," she said quietly. "The stronger the scent, the higher the value." The room seemed colder suddenly despite the fire. Rowan said nothing. Vivian lowered her gaze to the stone floor. "I was 14 the first time my scent appeared during training season." Shame burned hot beneath her skin, even now remembering it. "After that, they stopped calling me by my name." Rowan's expression darkened almost imperceptibly. "What did they call you?" Vivian hesitated. Then softly, "Investment." Silence settled again. Outside, wind roared violently against the tower walls, but inside the chamber, Rowan remained perfectly still. Too still. The Alpha King's gaze never left her face now. "Your pack sold Omega pairings?" he asked carefully. Vivian nodded once. "Temporary contracts. Breeding agreements. Political exchanges." Her throat tightened. Some girls stayed. Some disappeared. Rowan's jaw flexed hard enough for her to notice. The firelight flickered again across his silver eyes, and for one dangerous second, gold flashed beneath them once more. So you ran. Vivian looked away immediately. I survived. Rowan stared at her for a long moment after that. Not pity. Not judgment. Something heavier. Something quieter. Then suddenly, another violent wave of heat crashed through Vivian's body without warning. Her breath caught painfully. She stumbled backward against the edge of the cot nearest the fire. The scent suppressants had finally begun collapsing completely. Rowan reacted instantly. His shoulders stiffened. His next inhale came rougher than before. The air between them changed all over again. Vivian's pulse raced as warmth spiraled through her veins so intensely it almost hurt. She pressed trembling fingers against her mouth, horrified. No, Rowan took one sharp step backward instead of forward. Then another. Like distance itself had become necessary. Vivian, he said quietly, voice strained for the first time, look at me. She shook her head immediately. Fear clawed through her chest. Please stay away from me. Rowan closed his eyes briefly like the words physically struck him. When he opened them again, silver and gold flickered together beneath the firelight. The gold vanished from Rowan's eyes a second later, buried beneath brutal control, but the damage was already done. Vivian had seen enough to understand the truth now. The Alpha King was struggling as much as she was. Maybe more. That realization should have comforted her. Instead, it made the room feel even more dangerous. Because powerful wolves did not lose control safely. Rowan slowly stepped farther away from her until the back of his legs touched the stone table near the fireplace. He gripped the edge hard enough for the muscles in his forearm to tense beneath the rolled sleeve of his coat. His breathing remained controlled, but barely. Vivian could hear the difference now. Slower, rougher, instinctive. The firelight trembled across the sharp planes of his face while snow hammered against the tower windows above them. Your Majesty, she whispered weakly. You should leave before the storm seal resets. Rowan gave a humorless exhale. You heard the gates lock. Vivian lowered her gaze again. Another pulse of heat rolled through her body, leaving her dizzy enough that she sat carefully on the edge of the nearest cot before her knees failed completely. The room spun for a second. Rowan noticed immediately. She felt his attention shift toward her like physical pressure against her skin. Vivian. His voice lowered further. Softer now. Dangerous in a different way. When was your last suppressant dose? She hesitated too long. Rowan's expression hardened. How long? 3 hours. And before that? Shame tightened her throat. Yesterday morning. Rowan stared at her in disbelief. That amount would barely suppress a full omega for half a day. I know. Her voice cracked quietly. It was all I had left. Silence settled heavily between them again. Rowan looked away abruptly, jaw flexing once. For the first time since meeting him, Vivian realized something deeply unsettling. The Alpha King was angry. Not at her. At himself. At the situation. Maybe at the fact that his instincts reacted to her at all. He suddenly removed one black leather glove and pressed the heel of his hand hard against his eyes for a brief moment. Exhaustion showed there then, sharp and real beneath the crown and control. This should not be happening, he muttered quietly. Vivian frowned faintly despite herself. What should not? Rowan lowered his hand slowly. Silver eyes locked onto hers across the firelit room. My wolf. The honesty in his voice startled her more than anything else tonight. I have stood beside unmated omegas before. Council daughters. Noble bloodlines. Foreign royals. His expression darkened slightly. None of them affected me. Vivian's pulse stumbled painfully. Rowan took one measured breath before continuing. But the moment I walked into that corridor tonight, my instincts reacted like they recognized you. Heat climbed into her face again despite the fear knotting her stomach. That is impossible. I know. Another wave hit her suddenly before either of them could say more. Stronger this time. Vivian sucked in a sharp breath and doubled forward slightly, fingers gripping the blanket beneath her. The suppressants had finally lost almost all effect. Warmth rushed through every nerve beneath her skin until even breathing hurt. Rowan stood instantly. Do not move. The command cracked through the room before he softened his tone immediately. Please. Vivian's chest tightened strangely hearing that word from him. Please. Not demand. Not. Order. Rowan turned away fast and crossed toward the far side of the chamber where iron emergency restraints hung beside the archive wall. Her heartbeat slowed in confusion as he reached for them without hesitation. Then realization hit. The Alpha King was chaining himself. Rowan secured one heavy restraint around his wrist and locked the iron cuff tightly into the wall bracket before finally looking back at her. Firelight flickered across his face as gold threatened beneath his silver eyes once more. "Vivian," he said quietly, voice rougher than before. "I need you to stay as far from me as possible until sunrise." The sight of the Alpha King chained to the archive wall shattered something inside Vivian that fear alone could not hold together anymore. For several long seconds, she simply stared at him across the firelit chamber while the storm roared outside the tower like a living thing. Rowan stood near the iron restraints with one wrist secured in place, broad shoulders tense beneath his dark shirt, silver eyes lowered toward the floor as though forcing himself not to look directly at her for too long. He looked dangerous still, powerful still, but not cruel, never cruel. That realization unsettled her more deeply than she wanted to admit. Vivian had spent 6 years believing one thing about alpha wolves. Sooner or later, instinct always won. Power always took. Need always became possession. Yet Rowan Draven had chained himself to a wall rather than risk frightening her further. Her chest tightened painfully at the thought. Another pulse of heat rolled through her body, softer now but constant, like fire beneath her skin refusing to fade. She curled tighter beneath the blanket on the cot, trying to steady her breathing. Across the room, Rowan finally spoke without lifting his gaze. "You should try to sleep." Vivian almost laughed weakly. "I do not think sleep is possible tonight." A quiet silence followed. Then Rowan nodded once like he understood exactly what she meant. The fire cracked softly between them. Outside, wind rattled against the mountain stone while snow buried Blackthorn Palace deeper beneath the storm. Hours seemed to stretch endlessly in the dim archive chamber. Vivian watched the firelight flicker across Rowan's profile while he remained perfectly still beside the restraint wall. Even now, restrained and exhausted, there was something impossibly controlled about him. Like violence had never truly interested him despite the stories whispered across the territories. Eventually, her curiosity overcame fear. "Why did you do it?" Rowan glanced toward her slowly. "Do what?" "Chain yourself." His expression shifted faintly, almost confused by the question itself. "Because my wolf reacts to you." Vivian swallowed hard. Most alphas would not care whether that frightened an omega. Rowan's gaze sharpened slightly at her words. "The men from your pack," he said quietly. "They taught you that fear was normal." Vivian looked away immediately. Shame burned hotter than heat now. Rowan's voice softened further. "It is not." Something fragile inside her chest tightened painfully hearing that. She hated how much she wanted to believe him. The Alpha King studied her for another long moment before speaking again. "When I was younger," he said quietly, "my father believed dominance was proof of strength." Vivian looked back at him instinctively. Rowan's silver eyes reflected the firelight now, distant and unreadable. He ruled through fear. Every room grew silent when he entered it. His jaw tightened slightly. People obeyed him because they were terrified. Vivian listened carefully, surprised by the calm honesty in his voice. "When I took the throne," Rowan continued, "I swore my wolf would never become that kind of monster." Silence settled heavily after that. Vivian could not explain why his words affected her so deeply. Maybe because she believed them. Maybe because nobody had ever spoken to her like this before. Not as property, not as weakness, as a person. Another wave of warmth spread through her body, gentler this time, but no less dangerous. Rowan noticed immediately. His grip tightened slightly against the iron restraint. Gold flickered briefly beneath his silver eyes again before he forced it back down. Vivian's heartbeat quickened. "Does it hurt?" she asked softly before. Thinking better of it. Rowan looked genuinely surprised by the question. Then slowly, he answered honestly. "Yes." The single word settled into the room, like truth neither of them could escape anymore. Vivian stared at him across the firelight while snowstorm shadows danced against the walls around them. For the first time all night, fear loosened its grip just enough for another emotion to slip through instead. Trust. Small. Fragile. Terrifying. Rowan must have seen something change in her expression because his breathing faltered slightly. Then suddenly, somewhere above them, the heavy archive bells rang once through the tower. A warning signal. Rowan's entire posture changed instantly. His head lifted sharply toward the ceiling. Someone is coming. The warning bells echoed through the archive tower again, low and metallic beneath the sound of the storm outside. Vivian sat upright immediately, pulse quickening as footsteps faintly echoed somewhere above the lower chambers. Someone was searching the tower. Rowan's entire posture sharpened despite the restraint locked around his wrist. The Alpha King listened silently for several seconds before his gaze shifted back toward her. Stay behind me. Vivian blinked in surprise. What? Rowan stepped forward slightly until the iron chain pulled taut beside him. Someone should not be down here during a storm lock. His voice had gone cold again. Controlled. Dangerous in the way kings became when instinct turned toward protection instead of restraint. The footsteps grew louder overhead. Then came muffled voices beyond the upper archive hall. Male voices. Guards. Vivian's stomach tightened painfully. If royal guards found her trapped overnight alone with the Alpha King while her sense suppressants failed, rumors would spread through Blackthorn Palace before sunrise. Worse, if they sensed what she truly was, she would never disappear quietly again. Rowan seemed to realize the same thing instantly. His silver eyes locked onto hers. Can you control your scent for a few more minutes? Vivian tried to answer honestly, but another wave of heat rolled through her body before words came out. She gripped the blanket. Tighter, breathing shallowly through it. Rowan's jaw tightened hard. Then suddenly, without hesitation, he unlocked the restraint from the wall. The heavy iron cuff fell open around his wrist with a sharp metallic click. Vivian stared at him in shock. Your Majesty, there is no time. Rowan crossed the room in 3 silent steps and stopped directly in front of her. Too close. Warmth radiated from him instantly, mixing dangerously with the fading suppressants still struggling inside her bloodstream. But his expression remained focused entirely on her safety now. Nothing else. Listen carefully, he said quietly. When they enter, stay behind me and do not speak unless I ask you to. Vivian nodded weakly, unable to look away from his eyes. Gold flickered faintly beneath the silver again, but this time it did not frighten her. The footsteps reached the lower stairwell outside the chamber. A second later, the archive door opened hard enough to send cold air rushing inside. 3 royal guards stepped into the room, carrying lanterns. All 3 immediately froze at the sight before them. The Alpha King, standing near the fire. Vivian seated behind him wrapped tightly in blankets. Iron restraints hanging loose from the wall nearby. The lead guard lowered his head instantly. Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion. We heard the storm seal engage and came to ensure your safety. Rowan's expression turned unreadable again so quickly it almost felt unreal after everything that had happened tonight. As you can see, he said calmly, I am unharmed. The guards nodded quickly, but Vivian noticed the subtle shift in the air anyway. Wolves notice things. Questions already flickered behind their eyes. Rowan stepped slightly to the side then, deliberately blocking their direct line of sight toward her. Protective. Possessive. The motion sent silence through the room instantly. Even the guards noticed it. The lead guard hesitated carefully before speaking again. Should we escort the servant back upstairs, Your Majesty? Vivian's heartbeat stopped. Rowan answered before she could even breathe. No, the single word landed with absolute authority. Nobody argued. Rowan's. Silver Eyes never left the guards now. Vivian Hale remains under my personal protection until the storm passes. The room went completely silent. Vivian stared at him in shock. Personal protection. No servant in Blackthorn Palace received words like that from the Alpha King himself. The guards lowered their heads immediately. Yes, Your Majesty. Rowan waited until they disappeared back up the staircase before finally exhaling slowly. The moment the chamber door shut again, some of the cold control left his expression. He looked exhausted suddenly. Human. Vivian stood carefully from the cot despite the trembling weakness in her legs. Rowan turned toward her instantly, like instinct alone pulled his attention back to her. Firelight flickered softly between them, while snow buried the world outside the tower walls. Then, before fear could stop her again, Vivian stepped forward and gently placed her hand over his unrestrained wrist. Rowan went completely still beneath her touch. His breathing faltered once. Silver eyes locked onto hers with stunned intensity. Vivian's voice came out barely above a whisper. You were the first Alpha who ever made me feel safe.